Oh, what's good? My man in society, it is your host with the most, Shadowloke, back at you with another video. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free. That is how you help my channel get into the algorithm. Highly appreciate if you go ahead and do that. Now, what we got right here is one of California's more seductive, more depraved serial killers that there was, which is the Trailside Killer. Now, the Trailside Killer was a serial killer that had, I think, more than 10 victims to his name. And, he killed up in the Bay Area, the San Francisco, Santa Cruz area, were his stomping grounds. So he had Northern Cali rattled for a long time. It took them like 30 years to arrest this bastard, right? So the individual killed for a long time. Now, this case in itself was one of the cases that I had watched a TV special on that actually got me interested in wanting to educate myself on, human behavior, psychology, and all of that, right? I remember the TV special, they were covering this individual, and there was a conflict between the FBI profilers and the law enforcement that were handling this case, right? Which was the whichever law enforcement district was the one that was at the time in charge of the Trailside Killers, right? Because the FBI had a profile of what they believed the individual looked like, and the police officers actually had a different idea of what they felt like, the individual that they were looking for, looked like. So the thing that caught my attention with the profiler was when they had described them, and when they arrested the individual, not only did he fit every description that the FBI profiler gave, but even down to the stutter. They said that he had a stuttering problem. Now, how the fuck could you possibly know that this individual had a stutter? And then it turns out when they arrested him, he did have a stutter. Now, how did the profilers know this? That's when I started, educating myself and digging into, overall human behavior. And, it just blew my mind, because, he had a lot of victims to him. Now, the police officers, when they were looking for this individual or what they believed the individual looked like, they were looking for someone young, someone handsome. They said somebody that was attractive, somebody obviously in shape. And what else did they have said? I forgot the few other things that they had said, right? I think that he had it looked like he had wealth, like expensive clothing and jewelry and car, and you know what I mean? Because they felt like, well, he's leading these girls. If he's able to lead these girls over there, then he has to be good looking and, in shape and everything like that, because he would kill on a trail side, right? Like when the girls were running, when they were doing their daily runs, you know what I mean? He would, not only would he kill them, though, he would torture them, though. Since it's in a secluded area where nobody could hear you scream, right? It's a wooded area. He was able to do his thing, so he would love to torture them. It was one of his kinks. Now, when the FBI got there, the profilers, psychology and profiling was something new, right? It's something that people were still skeptics about, right? They really didn't believe the overall science of, profiling and psychology, right? Because ignorance, But anywho, they said that the individual was most likely an older individual, so already, contradicting the police officer's, profile in itself, right? That he was most likely unattractive. He most likely was insecure. They said that he most likely, was a loner, really had a hard time mingling with people. That he had a job, he was somebody that nobody would pay attention to, right? Somebody who would just go under the radar, somebody that people wouldn't even notice. You get what I mean? Quiet. While the police officers, profile was, somebody who was, talkative and somebody who caught people's attention. So already, the contradiction between the police profile and the FBI's profile, right? And the reason why the FBI believed this was the reason for the individual, and along with the stutter, is that the way he would target the women, right? It was a blitz attack, a surprise attack. the way he tortured them, right? Already showing some level of aggression towards women, right? He had a problem with women, maybe because they found him unattractive, maybe because they didn't pay him no mind, and the fact that he blitzed, already showed that it already showed the profilers that he didn't have the confidence to approach these women and talk and all of that, right? That's why they were blitz attacks, right? That's why most women had, blunt force trauma to the back of the head, showing that he would whack them in the back of the head. So they got hit when they least expected it, right? They weren't suspecting, like, you know what I mean? So that's how they knew that the individual had, self-esteem issues, not confident enough to go and talk to them and lure them. He had a, blitz attack. And the reason why they felt like the reason why they thought he would have a stutter, right, is because they said that he had to have some kind of disability to him, right? But they felt like if it was a physical disability, like, maybe, a disability with his leg or his arm or his face, that it would it would be more difficult to commit the crimes if he was disabled, right? So that's why they knew that it was a disability, but not a disability where it would enable him to commit these crimes in this trail side area, in this wooded area, right? So that's why they assumed that it had to be something like a stutter, and sure enough, he did have a stutter to him, a severe stutter to him, as a matter of fact. The crazy part about it is that he stuttered a lot, right? But when he would talk about his murders, like the crimes he would do when they were interrogating him, his stutter stopped. All of a sudden, he didn't stutter. When he was talking about the murders, he was able to talk clearly and without a stutter, showing that when he was in that state of mind, that excitement, in that moment, right? The moment that he felt powerful and he felt in control, he was even able to overcome his stutter, right? Now, growing up, to nobody's surprise right here, at least if you follow my channel, now you're probably wondering, how did this individual turn out to be the way, like the way he was? Well, growing up, he didn't have a good childhood. Dun, dun, dun. Ain't that a shocker? He grew up to an alcoholic father and a very abusive mother. They would obviously beat him and abuse him, to the point where he was wetting his bed all the way into his teenage years. He would wet the bed. He would be humiliated because his mom made him take violin and ballet. You're in high school, you're being forced to take ballet, you're overweight, and you have a stutter, and you're taking ballet. So, not, that in itself, you should already know, yeah, the kids would go in on this individual. He would get clowned on, humiliated, bullied. You know what I'm saying? Kids can be cruel, So his mother, and he hated ballerina, he hated all of that, but his mom would force him. He had no choice. Like I said, they were very abusive. They didn't care about his feelings. They didn't care about him. They only cared about what they said, and what they said went and goes. Right? Now, he had a troubled childhood, right? He would commit, he would hurt animals, abuse animals, kill them. But the biggest red flag of them all was that when he went to juvenile hall and he came out, right, for, robbery and stuff like that, he abused his cousins, his two cousins that were, I think they were babies, right, like a few months old, and one was like 3 years old. He sexually molested them. Now, when somebody young, like in their teenage, in their adolescence, is molesting, another child, that's a very, very, very big flag. That's a red flag. Like, that is, when it's a sexual crime at that age, they're only going to get worse. Well, statistics show that they only get worse. They grow up to be some of the most despicable people on this planet, right? When they commit sexual, crimes when they're in their adolescence, when they're molesting people in their, 13, 12, 11, 14. Yeah, that's not good. That's not good at all. They should be sent to like a mental hospital, or to seek some psychological evaluation, because they're only going to get worse. But most people think that they could fix the problem themselves. Most parents think that they have a hold on it, but their children end up becoming some despicable individuals. Right now, he went under the radar. He had a job. He was married, with kids, right? But he was not happy married, right? So it's not that he couldn't get a woman, because he had a woman. So it was he killed these women not because he wasn't able to get a woman because he was married, right? But he did it for the sexual arousal that he got, in these murders, right? And every time, he would torture them, he would get aroused, and that's why he would do it. As a matter of fact, his wife divorced him because she couldn't handle his overall sexual fantasies and sexual demands from her. Right, they would keep getting weirder and weirder, and she just wasn't down for it, and that's why she divorced him, right? Which sent him more into a spiral, right? And ramping up his murdering streak, right? He has up to 10 victims, but they think that there's more out there. Well, they know that there's more out there. He just is not willing to admit, But they only found 10 bodies, but they know that he killed more. So the individual was, one of California's more crazy guy. And looking at him, you wouldn't think like, oh, this guy wouldn't hurt nobody. He looks like regular old, like somebody's old uncle or grandpa or whatever the fuck. But little did people know this guy was, he had a lot of rage in him. And there was a lot of signs, a lot of warning signs since earlier, right? But the reason the reason why the cops didn't I guess, how could I say, think of him as a suspect or investigate him is because he didn't fit what the police officers were looking for. Even though when the FBI went there and told them that he was most likely overweight, unattractive, with a stutter, all this and that, the police officers were like, yeah, right. And they still kept looking for the person that they thought, how he would look. They were looking for a younger person who's, fit and, flashy. And they kept looking for that, right? And the murders kept happening, because the person that was committing them, they would probably pass him, when they were, patrolling. This fool was probably walking. They probably, no, that's not him. That's not him. We're looking for somebody handsome and young. And, and he was the killer, right? Why he was able to get away with the crimes for so long. And then once they arrested him, they realized, oh, shit. Yeah, these guys were right. Their profile was right. You know what I mean? Like, bro, these fools go to school for this, bro. They know what they doing. You know what I mean? They know their job better than you guys, bro. That's why they're higher than you guys. Profiling works, bro. Like I said, you don't have to know the individual in order for a crime scene to tell you about an individual, right? Of why he does what he does, right? The crime scene in itself will tell you about an individual, right? Even to the weapon that they use will tell you a lot about the individuals. You know what I mean? Because like I said, everybody has a profile to them. That's human behavior. That's what actually piqued my curiosity, and when I started, educating myself, and I was mind blown of, of everything, that I read up on, right, and learned about, it's a trip, it's a trip, it made a whole lot of sense, but overall, have you guys heard of this individual? Have you guys heard of this, killer and his crimes in California? Like I said, he was one of California's more seductive, serial killers. There's a lot of documentaries, books, articles, and all of that on this individual that you guys could go read up if it piques your curiosity, even on the profile in itself about this individual, because it's mind-blowing, right? These guys show up and they describe him to the dot, even to his stutter. That's crazy. All right, we out.